Hey guys, Davis here, and Nintendo just released a 20-minute direct revolved entirely around Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. With it, we get a lot of brand new snippets of gameplay, answers for a variety of how the game operates, the social elements, how we expect to play it, and some much needed answers on the story, and of course, the routes. If you are looking for more of my raw reactions to the actual direct itself, you can actually go watch Jop and I's reaction to it on his channel. Be sure to go check it out on there, and go like and subscribe to my boy Jop as well. With all that in mind though, let's just get right into it, as there's actually a decent amount here to cover. So right at the beginning of the direct, we get a very nice summary of just about all the character stories going into the heroic games. Starting off with Kai, we actually get the reveal of his father. Many believed and speculated to be it was this white-haired gentleman that was fighting Leda in the arena, but turns out that actually wasn't the case, and Kai's father is a completely different man altogether, who supposedly is being taken prisoner by supposedly soldiers of the Divine Sovereign for unknown crimes. So it doesn't necessarily look like that he is a gladiator stuck in the games, but someone that did something bad in the past that Kai isn't necessarily aware of. Unfortunately, we don't get any confirmation or news what the whole idea with the implement in Kai's hand even is, so I guess we'll have to find out more information for that when the actual game comes out in full in September. We also get some very nice snippets of our beloved edgelord Dietrich. Dietrich is shown sailing on a pretty stormy night on the way to supposedly Dagda, but he actually ends up getting washed up on Dagda, so we actually don't know if he was intending to go here to begin with. What's interesting to note about Dietrich's gameplay is that he's targeting specifically a lot of bandits and monsters to supposedly sate his bloodlust. And what's interesting also, near the end of the trailer, we actually get a little bit of a glimpse of Dietrich actually showing weakness and being surrounded by some sort of symbiote evil-like energy that probably is emanating from his sword. This almost seems to be an allusion to what happens to Miklon in Fire Emblem Three Houses. In Three Houses, Miklon ended up becoming a demonic beast due to the fact that he actually didn't have a crest stone when he wielded the Lance of Ruin, even though that is his house's weapon. The energy that seems to emanate from the Lance of Ruin almost seems to look very eerily close to what Dietrich seems to be surrounded by as he's about to fight what supposedly is some sort of pit beast in the arena. This could lead to a lot of interesting theories. Maybe there's a lot more malicious things going on with his relic weapon, or maybe the fact that Dietrich maybe doesn't necessarily have anything going on with his crest, or maybe a lack of a crest. That in itself could be a very interesting storyline, where a crestless individual is trying to subdue and try to avoid the fate of becoming a demonic beast himself. So it actually adds a lot of interesting nuance to Dietrich as just an edgy boy. He's actually trying to reverse his fate and a potential terrible curse that could befell him. Could be a pretty compelling story for him. Moving on, of course, we have our beloved Empress, Theodora. What's interesting to note about Theodora's spotlight is that they do make it a note that she actually does survive an assassination attempt that was placed on her and her father. You can actually also see in her bio during this trailer that Theodora actually lost her arm as a result of this encounter. So her entire left arm, as a matter of fact, is a prosthetic. And you can even see on the official Japanese site for Fortune's Weave that they actually show the cutscene for how Theodora ends up getting this arm. It looks like she's probably communing with some kind of old king of Seramis, which seems to be looking like this pharaoh individual, and she basically puts this being's arm on her left arm. So it could be beneficial for her to gain more powers, or maybe the arm is cursed and could lead to negative consequences later down the line, as we'll get to later in this video. Last, and certainly not least, we have a lot of people's best girl being spotlighted, and it is none other than Leda. Leda's story is shown to have a little bit more highlighting of what happened to her father. We do see the act of the murder happening to her father, but the person in particular that a lot of people theorized seems to be correct. The white-haired gladiator that we have seen in just about every single one of these trailers leading up to this point seems to be the culprit for Leda's father's murder. And this man they seem to dub the white-haired demon, and ever since then, Leda has had nothing but a bloodlust to kill him. And of course, since he's a gladiator in the heroic games, it's only natural that she wants to assemble a team to go and probably kick his ass or something. But I'm also really curious what this white-haired demon will have in store for us, as he himself is actually seen talking with Kai on the official Japanese site. So it could lead to a lot of interesting dynamics and storytelling and potential rivalries with the characters. Maybe if this guy sides with Kai, Leda may not look at him very fondly anymore. After the bios, we get a very quick smash cut of just about how Fire Emblem works between moving your units, seeing the weapon types interacting with each other, and of course, the actual weapons of the game. Swords they describe being a generic weapon, generally pretty reliable and accurate. Pretty true to its name. They also talk about spears. Now, usually, spears have been called lances throughout all of Fire Emblem, but this time around they're called spears, and they specifically note that they are effective against cavalry. So while the weapon triangle may not necessarily be a part of Fortune's Weave, this implication could be the fact that perhaps weapons are more effective against classes rather than actual weapons on a weapon triangle. It could lead to some interesting interactions and dynamics with the overall strategy of Fortune's Weave. And of course, gauntlets also make a well-known return, which they say they specialize in dodging, and supposedly a gun is also considered a gauntlet. Yep, you can in fact use a gun, which is the personal weapon of this priest lady behind us. So while it may be silly to see that there is a gun in a Carthage-style arena, in all honesty, this world is pretty well known to have futuristic technology, even in Three Houses. I mean, come on. The Pillars of Light are quite literally cruise missiles, and the Agarthans quite literally have, like, Bacta tanks that bring Nemesis back to life. Like, this shouldn't really be a shock to people. Though I will understand the fact that it is a little bit of a tonal difference between different genres with sci-fi and fantasy, and ultimately it is a bit of a goofy thing to see a futuristic gun that probably can get a attachable fucking laser sight on it, you know what I mean?
Fucking laser sights.
But hey, because forging is back in this game after all, maybe we can add some funny attachments to it Call of Duty style. Next up, they talk about magic, which they say is effective against armor. This is pretty on par for the course for just about any Fire Emblem game, as magic is known to melt just about any armor bro that comes its way. Though of course, if they drink a pure water, maybe they'll live. But I'm curious if they'll actually do more significant, effective damage against armor itself. And of course, lastly but certainly not least, they talk about the axe, which they say is known to be pretty clunky and inaccurate, but hits hard. But in the hands of a right weapon and a right soldier, an axe is your trusty man in any Fire Emblem game. So don't listen to what they say. You will trust the odds and you will hit your enemy. And of course, it's very fitting that they talk about the second best weapon, bows, which are very effective against flyers. Pretty on par and standard for Fire Emblem after all. Once they're done yapping about the most basic mechanics about Fire Emblem, they of course move on to the arena chapters of this game. The entire game is revolved around every month they do a significant mission. Most often than not, these are the arena battles that take place at the end of every single month. And they also show that main characters will actually fight each other. And even if they have pre-established relationships later down in the story, one day or another, they will have to fight each other to get their wish. But what is interesting to note is that the characters can also aid other main characters in their arena battles as guest green units. But in this case, green units aren't actually controlled by the AI, but probably controlled by you. As they move on through the arena, they also show that durability is a fact a part of this game, but it can only be degraded through the use of combat arts. Now, what is interesting about this is that normal combat doesn't seem to reduce durability itself, but powerful combat arts will be taking the place of durability as well. Since you can repair your weapons, I do imagine that combat arts will be something that the player will frequently spam, but I also wonder if you can just do the entire game without even spamming weapon arts at all, and you can just do standard Fire Emblem combat without even breaking a simple weapon. This could be the way to bridge both fans of durability systems and infinite durability, where if they want to play an infinite durability game, they don't have to interact with the combat arts. Or if they do want to interact with the combat arts, they still have to play around with the strategic element of the durability of their weapon, lest it become broken. They also do show a glimpse of all of the blaze arts that the characters have access to. So far, we've only seen blaze arts being used on the main characters, even though the blaze art gauge is shown to be on the side characters as well. I really wish we got to see more of this and got more of a direct answers of how blaze arts interact more so with the side characters, more so than the main characters. Though, in all fairness, we do actually get to see Leida's demonic beast that she can summon in action. A 4-tile unit in Fire Emblem that we actually get to control is super cool, and I really like that we get to utilize just monster classes and beasts at long last in a Fire Emblem game. As the arena section does go on, we also do get to see this game's version of the turn wheel, which is called Fortuna's Blessing. As the trailer goes on, unfortunately, the person providing footage stupidly got Tiara killed, and as a result, has to show off the turn wheel mechanic, otherwise known as Fortuna's Blessing. Fortuna's Blessing works very much just like the turn wheel. You can circle back and go back to any turn that you supposedly make a mistake, and of course, you want to continue without losing a beloved unit along the way. But what is interesting to note about this section is that there is a consumable item in the top right of the screen called Divine Sand. Now, how you can acquire this consumable isn't necessarily clear, nor how much of it is consumed depending on how far back on your turns you go. But it seems to be the case that the turn wheel is going to be utilized through the use of a consumable item rather than a set amount of uses of the Divine Pulse you get per chapter. So maybe it can add to the whole strategic element that you can't always rely on the turn wheel at the end of the day. Or maybe you could get showered in these things and fight it on the open world, but we'll get to that soon. I think what's also interesting to note about these chapters is that they actually give you a little bit of a strategic overview before you go into them. You get a really nice overview of what classes you should bring to this map, what weapons you should rely on, what level your party should be, and even a little hint about what's to come in the future. It's a nice little quality of life thing that I can always appreciate. What's also really cool too is the fact that we actually have the ability to see our characters' growth rates. Now, this is a feature that a lot of people that are veterans in the community, most notably in the hacking community, know very well that you can just look up growth rates through the click of a button through custom ROM hacks. But a mainline entry that actually shows the growth rates is a first for this game. And, well, it's a nice little quality of life thing that we can utilize. Though I suppose there's also a merit in not necessarily knowing the character's growth rates for a first playthrough. Maybe, say, through their base stats, how they play in combat, their average level ups, so on and so forth. But to each their own, and I can always appreciate that quality of life changes like this are nice to see in a Fire Emblem game. Moving on, we also get to see what looks to be the class option features in this game. Spoiler alert, it's pretty much just Three Houses certifications. And just like in Three Houses, there are several tiers of classes that your units will be able to... I was going to put the X down. And, well, just like in Three Houses, you have access to beginner, intermediate, and advanced classes to reclass into. Just like in Three Houses fashion, each of these classes will require certain requirements in their weapon ranks, level ups, and of course, along with it, when you turn into this class, you get a dedicated class skill along with stats being added or subtracted due to the class that you end up choosing, and a mastery skill that you can likely assign to your character once they have mastered the class and can be carried over to other classes that they decide to become later on. Some of these classes that they have shown do have some really cool abilities, and most notably, one of the brand new classes, the Chariot, has the ability to what seems to be charge up an override-like ability from Engage, where they can charge on a line that is indicated by a dark purple indicator and do raw physical damage to the enemy of anyone in their path. If anything, I'm glad that they borrowed this mechanic from Engage, because overriding was by far one of the most satisfying abilities that you can utilize in Engage, on top of all the other emblem rings that you had access to. Not only can you override as a Chariot Rider, but as a matter of fact, you do have the ability to become an Elephant Rider. That's right, you can have a 4-tile playable elephant class on your team. And Anna is shown riding through, just bulldozing those idiots on the bridge like it's nothing to her, and just having a grand time while doing it. 4-tile units are something that I've always wanted to see be playable in Fire Emblem, as 4 tiles can allow for interesting dynamics of utilizing of blocking choke points, and of course manipulating the tiles to your advantage, and perhaps to AoE attacks, and offer a lot more risk and reward engagements of compared to other units where having 4 tiles does allow 8 melee units to attack you, and on top of other ranged attacks as well. Seeing 4-tile units being utilized in Fortune's Weave is honestly kind of a welcome blessing for me. I always wanted to really experiment with these kinds of units like the Demonic Beasts, but have them on our side. In a lot of ways, they remind me of the Varl from Banner Saga. The Varl in Banner Saga were pretty much oversized Vikings with glorious beards, sharp axes, and an insane amount of bulk behind them. They served not only as a bulwark to cover some of your more squishier targets, but they also packed a heck of a punch against your enemies. But it also offered a lot of risk and reward factor for you, as it is easier for the enemy to surround your Varl, and is a little bit difficult to maneuver around due to the restriction of 4 tiles. So while 4-tile units may sound strong, like you have your own personal mini-boss to utilize against the enemy, they can unfortunately also work against you, so it also adds another cool strategic layer on the player's side to utilize such a powerful tool, but can also come to bite them in the ass. And of course, we get to see the tried and true classes, we get to see Pegasi, we see a Great Knight, we see a Wyvern Lord needs set to... bring that ass back here, excuse me? Is that Sedith? So, as a matter of fact, it seems this game's gonna have more connections to Three Houses than we realize. It doesn't outright confirm whether this game is going to be a prequel or a sequel, as a lot of people are still torn whether the actual Dagnan calendar does share the same year as the Adrestian Empire. So we don't necessarily know if this Setith is an older Setith after the events of Three Houses, or is just a Setith that is traveling the world after the defeat of Nemesis. We don't really know, and honestly, you could add some nice plausibility to the theory that perhaps Nene is also Flame if this game is a sequel. But only time will tell, and I'm glad to see my boy Seteth back in action. One of my favorite characters of Three Houses, and I'm excited to see him once again in this game. But of course, it's always happy to see Seteth, but we do have to talk about the social elements that this game has in store for us. Namely, all the things that happen in your hub world of Daxian. In Daxian, you have some options of how to spend your time accordingly. You can go watch arena battles to go gain XP. It almost kind of reminds me of Three Houses seminars, where you're able to have dedicated skills and classes assorted to you based on the interests you want your characters to grow in if you want to skip a week through the monastery. You can also eat meals with your allies to gain supports, like Three Houses. You can also build statues to the gods and gain blessings, like Three Houses. You could also go to the certification master, like Three Houses. There are also quests, like Three Houses. So yeah, it's very obvious that they're borrowing a lot of elements from the monastery. I've made it no secret on my channel that I am not a big fan of the monastery loop. If anything, the monastery is the one thing that always prevents me from going back through every single playthrough of Three Houses. I mean, there's a reason why I'm doing the No Monastery mod on my channel to begin with to play through Three Houses. I simply just don't want to do all of the grinding that has to encompass with the monastery. But, you know, some people do like the aspects of growing their teams and grinding out the monastery as much as possible in order to get a really juiced up and optimal team, so I can respect that. Ultimately, I do think that this is a move that the developers ended up doing to bring back the Three Houses crowd to their games, and frankly, I can't blame them, because Three Houses was insanely successful in appealing to the masses. So trying to recapitalize on that success from a marketing and business standpoint really is a no-brainer, and honestly, much as I am not a big fan of the monastery, it's something that I'll have to grit and bear through. Ultimately, Fire Emblem's always going to be my favorite franchise that I'll always turn up for. I've practically just about turned up for every single series in the West, and I ain't going to miss this one either. Going back to the meals, it almost looks like that recruitments ultimately require support points, rather than, say, meeting an arbitrary requirement like having an interest in utilizing faith, reason, or just being a female professor that Sylvain really just has an interest in. But moving on from more of the social elements, let's talk about one thing that I was the most afraid of going into this game, and that's the world map. When I first saw this world map in the previous direct trailer, I was hesitant. The fact that they didn't really explain what the 174 turns meant, what any of the tiles do, and the fact that we were only shown skirmish footage throughout the time of leading up to this direct, I ultimately was worried that this game was just going to be a grind fest and there wasn't really going to be anything behind this map and that playthroughs were going to be infinitely longer. But what is nice is that they actually do show that turns do pass over time based on the actions that you can do. And this, I'm so glad that they clarified. 174 turns in the context of Fire Emblem can take an exuberant amount of time, so I was a little worried that the time spent in this was going to be in actual in-game turns rather than actually being spent through other means. So the turn counter for every single month actually does go down based on actions that you do. Some of the actions that I mentioned before, like watching the arena, does pass time. Walking around the world map, in fact, does cost turns to do. Encountering skirmishes and gaining XP does cost turns. And of course, what is interesting is if you're not necessarily up for grinding, there is the inn that you can interact with in Daxian. This inn actually allows you to automate your own optimization for the grinding. So you can essentially assign your characters to either do what seems to be combat, search, or training.
Do you wish to train?
No, dude, just trying to read a book.
Posse?
You're not gonna goat me into fighting you.
You're a soft bitch who doesn't play defense.
Wow, okay, now that is bullshit!
To this end, it seems to be that combat probably represents you get flat XP for your characters, training likely represents the weapon skills and dedicated skills to get to certain class certifications, and search probably has to do with acquiring items on the world map that your units can end up doing. I do like this feature a lot, that it does present the option that perhaps if you're a little too tired of the grind, you can go out of your way to just do this and do a little bit more of a traditional style of Fire Emblem gameplay, of chapter by chapter gameplay, which that I appreciate. Though going back to the world map, it is interesting to know that every single character does have a unique action that they can take for themselves. Dietrich, for instance, can channel a spell that finds enemies that are about to ambush him. Well, great, ambush spawns are in the world map, so while Dietrich's able to look up the cheat codes and see them, the other players will not be so lucky. We also see that Theodora can utilize and recruit battalions, where she can send them out to do unique tasks, whereas she maybe can get valuable resources out of them and send them to other parts of the map with the cost of some turns. What is interesting though is that we haven't seen the other characters being able to utilize battalions, as battalions were a key feature in Three Houses where just about every character could have a battalion assigned to them with the correct authority rank. So for now, it always seems like Theodora's route is the only one capable of utilizing these battalions, but maybe our other characters will actually be able to utilize them in other ways. And we also do see that Leda has a unique action on the world map where she can perform a song, where she can get some valuable resources out of some people passing by. Could be a really nice little way to grind some valuable resources that you're desperate to get. And of course, Kai's unique gimmick is interesting in that he can tame unique mounts, as we see that Kai's new chicken that he captures actually allows him to get a boost to his build. So it can add to some really cool gameplay dynamics of utilizing unique mounts, and it can also give some unique flavor and identity to more mounted units than just Kanto. As the world map section does wrap up, we actually do get to see the elements that the dungeon crawling has in store for us. This seems to borrow a lot of elements from the Shadows of Valentia dungeon system, where your main lord travels through a certain dungeon and can collect valuable resources and loot from treasures all together, while also encountering some nasty beasts along the way. What is interesting to note about the dungeons is that when you do fight beasts, they're actually not grid maps. In fact, they play a lot more like traditional JRPG battles, where your party gets to do their actions and turns and fight them, and then your enemies attack you in response. Basically, kind of just Final Fantasy style gameplay. But your characters in this system can also grow supports by doing combo attacks and probably just being in the same party together ultimately. What is nice to note here too is that you could just auto-resolve these and skip them if you really want to too, but it also makes me wonder if there's going to be some unique turn-based bosses that we'll have to fight as well and actually strategize around in a traditional JRPG elements. That kind of brings me back to the days when I played a lot of Dragon Quest. Almost is really cool to think about, huh? Now, let's save the best element of this trailer for last. I skipped over this section from the social elements as I really wanted to save this section for the end of the video, so without further ado, let's just talk about the Pale Raven's Perch. The Pale Raven's Perch basically allows you to interact with these Obelisk and Daxian, and you can choose to play any route you want concurrently at any point of the game. That's right, while you can just dedicate your time to one lord and maybe choose your first lord that you'll ever get to experience with, you actually have the opportunity to play every single route concurrently. This reveal alone adds for a lot of great replay value opportunities for Fortune's Weave. As with Three Houses, White Clouds was very repetitive and you didn't really get to the unique content of every single route until the latter half of said game. Whereas in this game, you can just play any lord you want. Maybe you want to have some favoritism for one lord and ignore the other three. Or maybe you want to go out of your way to do every single completionist aspect and get every little thing for every single route available in Fortune's Weave. Perhaps this can also open up some interesting Iron Man format settings where, say, you want to recruit a lot of the characters into a certain route over others, you could just invest your time into one lord and have all of your pool of units into one section of the army. But perhaps you are incentivized to use all of the routes, and maybe that isn't optimal at all. But I'm hopeful that this will allow for different playstyles and potentially allow for Iron Man elements to be plausible in Fortune's Weave. But that also does lead to some interesting questions. If you do swap between every single character, does that mean that you're locked out of certain characters when you recruit them into one army over another? Let's say, for instance, that Kai recruits these three schmucks. Does that mean that Theodora, Dietrich, and Leda can't recruit these units in their armies either? Or does that more mean that they can also get them and maybe these timelines are almost separate in their own way? Since they do ultimately fight each other in the arenas, I have to imagine that these routes are happening concurrently, and you get to experience every single story at the same time, which I greatly appreciate for the sake of doing one playthrough. Now, in the essence of doing one single playthrough, let's also talk about our boy, Ishmael. Not only are we revealed that Ishmael is literally dubbed the actual main character of the game, but there's also a time skip that takes place in Fortune's Weave. So basically, 5 years after the heroic games, a catastrophic event happens where the god of the underworld basically plunges the entire world into chaos, and apocalypse is basically just happening. And they even confirm that all 4 of the lords in the heroic games just die. They're dead. They're gone. It almost kind of harkens back to Awakening, where Grima and the Risen basically just destroyed Elise and killed Crom in the first generation, while Lucina and the other kids had to clean up Grima's mess and ultimately win the day through time travel. And, well, that's exactly what Ishmael does, as he is tasked by Sothis when he is reborn to basically go back into the past and find the unique golden route and change the fates of all 4 of these characters. Funnily enough, this is actually something that I ended up predicting in my analysis video of the second trailer of Fortune's Weave. So, between the Pale Raven's Perch and Ishmael's entire character pitch, we're effectively incentivized to go through all 4 routes on our first playthrough. This effectively ends up being the golden route that Three Houses never got, and I'd be curious to see what they end up doing. It could be interesting to think about too is, what is Ishmael effectively trying to prevent happening? Maybe he's effectively trying to manipulate what wishes these characters are trying to get for why they're going through the heroic games. Maybe their wishes end up causing more catastrophe than anything else, or maybe the Divine Sovereign is a complete fraud, like a Wizard of Oz, or maybe he's a follower of the god of the underworld that we see in the trailer. Though, ultimately, we do have the ability to experience every single story route in a single playthrough of Fortune's Weave. But this can also lead to some very dynamic challenge runs, or unique runs that Fortune's Weave provides. Maybe it actually is difficult to get all 4 of the characters on your side. Maybe you need to meet certain requirements, or you might miss certain things that you didn't do on your first playthrough, and you can only get 2 of the 4 lords to help you in the end game against the all-stopping, all-powerful dragon that the underworld shows. Or maybe you just solo it with Ishmael and you completely blunder and all of the lords get killed. Can actually open up for a lot of interesting challenge runs where maybe you invest all of your resources into one lord, recruit all of the units into that said lord's army, and only bring them into the ending that Ishmael is effectively pitching to us as the player. This can also lead into interesting dynamics for YouTubers that also do a lot of Iron Man runs, where they self-restrict themselves to perhaps only investing into one lord and recruit all the units that they can possible, and their main game over condition is really their lord as opposed to 4, or maybe challenge themselves even more and try to get all 4 lords in the end of Fortune's Weave for Ishmael to fight the big bad evil guy. But only time will tell how effectively we can do these challenge runs in Fortune's Weave when the game comes out. If anything, I'm excited to see what it has in store for us. So yeah, that's what we got from the 20-minute direct of Fortune's Weave. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are probably wondering and asking the question, hey Davis, how are you feeling about Fortune's Weave after seeing this direct? And I gotta be honest, man, I'm cautiously optimistic still. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy that they did show the world map, that they actually explained what the turns actually mean in regards to time, showing off the dungeon crawling, and showing that you can ultimately skip through a lot of the social elements grinds altogether. This game does ultimately seem to be a Three Houses 1.5 2.0 style game. And I didn't necessarily enjoy the monastery loop on Three Houses. Effectively, it was my main reason why I was always so hesitant to replay Three Houses. But I can safely say that I'm really glad that you can play all 4 routes on a single playthrough, where you don't have to go necessarily a lot of the same grind, and you don't have to go through White Clouds again, and you can just experience unique playthroughs of restricting yourself maybe to 1 to 2 to 3 or all 4 lords to go help Ishmael, or maybe just do an Ishmael Juggernaut run. There's a lot of opportunities that this game can be, and ultimately, I want to try to stay as optimistic as I can for Fortune's Weave. Obviously, I'm going to play the game when it comes out, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to like it. At the end of the day, I'm going to try to be as optimistic as I can about this game, and you'll get my full thoughts about this game once it's actually released in September, so look forward to that when the game comes out. Thanks so much for listening to my little rambling section about the Fortune's Weave Direct. Now, I want to hear from all of you guys. How are you feeling about Fortune's Weave after this Direct? Are you feeling optimistic about this game? Are you feeling really good about how the routes will play out? Or do you have some worries about the game going into September? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear all the discourse about Fire Emblem, as it is always one of my favorite franchises. And of course, if you enjoy videos like this, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy Fire Emblem content. My name is Davis G. I'll see you all in the arena in September. Take care.